All right. Let's get my computer screen and my video up here. Hey. And I'll wait to see if I go live. It's been a while since I did one of these. Hopefully my mic doesn't cut out like it did on my last live stream. I think giving the computer a break was a good idea. Well, my phone says that I'm live too. Though it didn't play the ad that I'm used to. Okay, my computer says it's streaming. Can anyone see me? Can anyone hear me? Oh, there we go. I see my video now. I gotta wait for the Twitch ad to play. As soon as I get a hello from someone else, I'll know that I'm good to go. Well, I'm the only one in the chat room. Today was a tie with tomorrow and Wednesday, so. Oh, wait, I see more viewers joining right now. Someone said they had to remember their password. Okay, all right. Glad you're in. How does my audio sound? Sweet. Okay, all right. Audio sounds good tonight. That is a relief. If I start to cut out, or I think what my Web 1 students were telling me is it sounded like I would hit a little like hiccup and I would repeat myself like 3 times in a row. If that happens, let me know. Because it's a mystery to me still. All right, so welcome to week 11 in Web Design 2 at Mid-Michigan College. We're going to talk about content management systems this week. And this live stream is going to focus mostly on installing the most popular content management system in the world, WordPress. In my announcement this week, I mentioned that a surprising percentage of the websites run in the world are using WordPress. And I have to look it up every semester I teach because it keeps creeping up higher. I think the first time that I taught Web 2, WordPress had something like 25% of all active websites were running on WordPress. Now it's closer to like a third, like 33% of all websites running on WordPress. And that continues to blow my mind. And it's why I feel responsible to introduce you to it in Web Design 2. And actually, I have fond memories of WordPress. I've been using it since version 1. It used to be what powered my website. And it's not something that we've used for the main Mid-Michigan College website, but we do have a WordPress site that we use for student bloggers who blog about their experience at the college. And that was kind of our first experiment with WordPress on campus. And it's been going pretty well, so I think we might be exploring other options for using WordPress even at Mid-Michigan College. So, the first assignment that I wanted to mention in the task list was to do a CMS, a content management system comparison challenge. And the gist of it is I don't want you to think that WordPress is what every content management system is like. So I want to give you exposure to at least 2 this semester. So your first challenge this week is to sign up for a WordPress.com account. That's WordPress.com is the company that funds the actual open source aspect of WordPress. You can actually sign up and pay for a domain and pay for hosting month to month, and they'll host it for you. But you can also just get a free WordPress.com account to create a small, simple website or blog. So that's what I want you to do first, and I hope you've already started that for this week. Secondarily, I'd like you to sign up for an account on either Wix or Weebly. I've heard great things about both. I think that most of the students that I'm familiar with in the graphic design program will eventually choose something like Wix or Weebly for hosting their portfolio. I want you to compare and contrast what it's like setting up a website using WordPress and setting up a website using Wix or Weebly. What website do I create? Well, you don't have to create a huge one. In fact, I would almost recommend that you take your midterm project, Brandon's Bistro, and recreate it. Not the design necessarily, but the content. Take that content that you built with the menu, the about information, the contact information, and try to put that on a WordPress site or a Wix site. You can get a feel for what it's like creating posts, like a blog, or creating pages, which is more like a traditional website. And you can have some experience with choosing themes inside of those platforms. I want you to be able to compare and contrast the two, because I think if you compare these two different blogging or content management systems, you'll get a feel for the types of features that draw people in to a content management system. My goal with the web design classes as part of the web design certificate at Mid-Michigan College is that you will be able to build websites by hand and also build websites that can be maintained by your clients should you be a freelancer even after you leave the project. And so a content management system is like the key foundation that is going to allow your site to be editable when you, the web designer, isn't around. So getting familiar with those features is the first challenge for this week. And so I guess a good question is, what do you turn in? I need you to either write a short paper or create a Google Slides presentation that explains maybe some screenshots of what is similar and what is different between WordPress, Wix, and Weebly. You only have to pick two. And if you choose Google Slides, you can always write your comments underneath the images, like in the speaker notes or on the slide. So I'm not looking for anything too extensive. Like, you don't have to design a very complicated website, but you do have to get a feel for creating a couple pages in both, and then looking at those admin interfaces, the dashboards, and comparing them between the two. And what I enjoy about grading this assignment is WordPress, Wix, and Weebly are constantly evolving and improving. So I don't think there's been a semester yet where the WordPress screenshots that I've had have carried over, because it's getting better every time. There's a question in the chat. How does WordPress or Wix or Weebly compare to Concrete 5? Oh, Concrete 5 is the content management system that we chose for the current mid website. I would say that Concrete 5 is probably a lot more like Wix or Weebly, or actually the new editing experience that's built into WordPress 5 is called Gutenberg. That type of block interface where you can add content and stack it on top of each other is a lot what we liked about Concrete 5. Concrete 5 is an open source product. It is not under huge development, and so I think that at mid we've almost outgrown what Concrete 5 can do from a performance standpoint. So I do see our college potentially moving away from Concrete 5 for most of its content, and actually picking something up like WordPress, because it's more popular. There's a lot more of an ecosystem around it in terms of plugins and themes. Yeah, so I think the person in the chat room saying that they've used it, and it does get clunky sometimes. Yeah, it definitely does. But it was ahead of its time in some of the editing interface that it provides. WordPress 5, I'd say, is finally catching up to that. Okay, so the heart of this live stream is going to be about installing WordPress. So I want to have you train your mind, take a look at some of your older work. I want to build upon the Ubuntu web server that you built for Brandon's Bistro for the midterm. There's a plethora of resources that I've linked inside of the second challenge for the week, the WordPress VM challenge. I've linked to my outline of steps for installing Ubuntu. And those notes were heavily inspired by this DigitalOcean article about how to install Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP on Ubuntu. So we've actually gone through most of this tutorial already. I am going to pull that back up because there's sections that we kind of skipped that we're going to do that for sure this time. And then DigitalOcean is a fantastic resource for lots of web server, web design, like web administration techniques and skills. So they wrote a really good tutorial on installing WordPress that we'll follow as well. And I did go through that this weekend. What's great about the DigitalOcean tutorials is that you can copy and paste a lot of the commands, but there is particularly one step of this article about installing WordPress that I had to modify, or I couldn't just copy and paste. I had to actually take a look at what was already there on my VM and adjust it instead of just pasting what they provided. And then I also provided links to 2 different lynda.com courses. I will probably leverage these resources more in the upcoming weeks as you start working on your final project. But the WordPress 4 Essential Training is, I think, almost like an 8-hour course. I have it up here in a tab. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's only 5 hours, 40 minutes. It is an extensive course about what WordPress and content management systems are, how to use them, how to add pages and posts, and how to set up a theme. We're going to be referring back to this for sure. This was released originally back in 2015, and they have been trying to keep this course up to date. And I got confused this weekend because there's already a WordPress 5 Essential Training. The version of WordPress that we're going to install today is version 5. And a lot of the topics from WordPress 4 carry over into WordPress 5. And there are some new features that, frankly, we probably won't be using that are part of WordPress 5 that I wanted to at least provide this link. Because I imagine in future semesters that they will continue filling out the WordPress 5 course. I looked at it this weekend. Here's the screen of it right now. It's only an hour and 52 minutes. So I'm not sure what their plan is, if they're recreating all of the course, which they usually do for a new version of like Adobe Photoshop, or if they actually intend to keep both of these courses around and have only new features in WordPress 5. I think it's too early to tell because this was most recently updated on March 20th, which as of this recording is really only a few days ago. So things are evolving very quickly with WordPress, and I have to say that's part of the reason why we want to learn about it, because of this fast development is why it's so widely adopted. But it also makes it really challenging to create activities and assignments and a curriculum around it, because that is changing so constantly. So what I am going to be trying to do is link us to resources that that I know for sure have been updated as WordPress has changed. So this lynda.com course is a great one, and the DigitalOcean blog posts and articles and guides are even great too. We've been following that at Mid for years now. It looks like there's another question in the chat. This is a bit random, but do you need to buy the domain name with WordPress or other content management system we'll be using? For the final project, there's no commitment for you to buy a domain name. If you would like to, you certainly can try to get hosting and set up a WordPress site. But what I will be doing for your final project this semester is hosting on my own web host that I pay for personally. I will be setting up a spot where you can set up your own copy of WordPress for this semester. I've run into issues providing WordPress to a lot of people. Because it's such a popular platform, it's actually heavily scanned and targeted by bad people in the world. So if you run WordPress, you have to keep it up to date, and it has a mechanism to auto update. But when we go through this setup process, we probably aren't going to pick really strong passwords because we're just playing around with it tonight on a VM. And that has happened on my web host. There's been copies of WordPress sites from students that were taken advantage of, and I had to delete them eventually. So I hope that answers your question. For the final project, you will be setting up a WordPress site, but I will provide the hosting. So you do not have to buy a domain name or hosting. Cool. I'm glad that answered the question. Okay, so let's dust off some things that we haven't done in a while. I have been controlling another computer over here, where I've been running VirtualBox. This live stream gig that I got going on with Twitch really taxes my primary computer, so I had to figure out a way to run VirtualBox separately. But that's cool. That's what we're doing. We're trying to, emulate connecting remotely to a Linux machine and using it, right? So all that you have to know is I'm running another computer that has VirtualBox on it, and I found my Ubuntu VM that we created way before the midterm project, and I was able to power it on. I think I recreated this since then because I wanted to kind of start fresh. So let me tell you where this VM is at. It has Ubuntu installed, and I've run updates. It doesn't even have Apache. I did, right before the live stream began, I ran a command to look up the IP address. So if I close my remote connection to it and I switch over on my Mac to the terminal application, I believe the IP address, yeah, there we go. It's my internal network IP address, so hopefully sharing this on the internet won't do anything bad. I had to remember what my username and password was, which I imagine will actually be the difficulty that many of you face if you're trying to use one of the VMs that you created long ago. If you want to completely restart, that's why the guide and the outline and the notes are all in there. You can create another second VM just for the WordPress if you want. Like I said, I'm going to try to remote connect to mine now with the terminal on a PC. That would be with something like Putty. And let's hope I remember my password. Hey, I'm in. Look at that. Okay. So I've got Ubuntu 18.04.2. And I'm pretty sure I don't even have Apache installed. So if I do a command, apt cache is like the cache of local software that's been installed. I'm going to search for policy Apache 2. So apt cache goes along with the apt get command that we've been using in our notes. So this is just confirming to me that I searched for Apache 2. I don't have anything installed for Apache 2. So this is like way early on in our notes for setting up our Linux machine. Oh yeah, someone mentioned that they had to recreate their VM after moving their computer around. I know that I have sometimes had to recreate my VMs just because like my home network changes, and I couldn't get it to get an IP address months after I had created it. But I got lucky with this one. So, all right, so let's pick up where we left off with our notes. I am going to go to this article. It's the how to install LAMP on Ubuntu. And I did the prerequisites. So I guess I'm doing more of this tutorial than I originally thought. The first thing that you want to run is the apt update command. Let me zoom this up a little bit bigger. So apt update is actually going to get a list of all the updated software that's available for your VM for Ubuntu. So let me paste that in, sudo apt update. When you're on a Mac, you can copy and paste into the terminal. If you're using Windows with Putty, you might find that you have to right-click to paste inside of Putty. It's a little weird to start with, but you get used to it. All right, so I pasted that in, and it went out, and it checked for software, and it says that there are 2 packages that can be upgraded. I'm going to skip those for now. You can run a command later to upgrade them. But we're going to install Apache 2. So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. It tells me that, okay, you want Apache 2, but look at all the other goodies that you have to install if you want Apache. Do I want to continue? I'm going to enter a capital Y for yes. Someone asked, what is LAMP? I am glad you asked that. It's an acronym. Stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Much of the internet runs on a LAMP stack. It powered the Mid website for so long. I mean, it still does right now. It's powered Moodle. Moodle runs on top of Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP at Mid-Michigan College. If you want to learn how to build a back-end website, LAMP is a wonderful platform to start with. PHP is a programming language that you can use to build web pages. Okay, so I installed Apache. What was next? They ask you to adjust your firewall to allow web traffic. So what's interesting is we can totally follow through this, and I will in a second, but I'm pretty sure the firewall that is on Ubuntu, when you have a fresh install of Ubuntu, it's not even on. It's called a UFW because it's the uncomplicated firewall. If I search for UFW Ubuntu, you can see that it tells you it's the uncomplicated firewall. It's one of the easiest ways to set up a firewall on Linux. Even Red Hat and other distributions don't have things that are as nice as UFW, in my opinion. Wow, its website is a little slow. But yeah, I think it's funny that they tell you how to adjust the firewall, but the firewall is not even on. So I'm going to continue on with following their directions because installing a firewall and activating it is a good step. So the first thing that we're going to do is sudo for superuserdo UFW. We're going to ask the uncomplicated firewall to list what apps it knows about. And when I do that, it says that you have configuration available for Apache, Apache Full, OpenSSH, which is what we're using to connect with the terminal. So then what they really want us to do is say, you need to tell the uncomplicated firewall to allow the profile for Apache Full to work. And what this does behind the covers, if you do this app info command, is it opens up 2 ports on your Linux VM. It opens up port 80 and it opens up port 443. Port 80 is the original port for web traffic, and that's what Apache would normally run on. But when we started looking at accepting credit cards and having usernames and passwords, we very quickly realized that we needed to have an encrypted way to send information from a web server to a browser. And that's where HTTPS and SSL came from. That runs on a separate port. So if you're asking for information from a web server and you ask it over port 80, it's unencrypted. And when you ask for it over port 443, it's encrypted. So when we're configuring the firewall with this Apache profile, it's going to open up ports 80 and 443, which we need open in order for you to actually go to your Linux VM and see any content with a web browser. So they have a command here for actually allowing Apache Full. So that would be sudo ufw allow in, and then in double quotation marks, I think this is important or significant, Apache Full. So I'm going to paste that in. The other one that we would probably want to set up if we wanted the firewall enabled would be this OpenSSH. So I'm going to get app info on OpenSSH. And what this would do is open up port 22. And that's how I'm connected with SSH on my Mac terminal. It's how you're connecting with PuTTY. If you wanted to enable your firewall, you really would want to have port 22 open so that you can continue to remotely connect to it. So I'm going to do that same command. I'm going to sudo ufw allow in for OpenSSH. And so that updated the rules so that SSH will be open. Yep, within double quotation marks. Yep. So I pasted that in. And I am going to enable the firewall. Now I'm going off memory here. If it's the wrong command, what you could do is just run sudo ufw. And maybe -- help, and it will tell you the commands with this -- help flag. It'll tell you the commands that you can add to it. So enable will enable the firewall. So let's sudo ufw enable. It warns you. Let me scoot this up so you can see. Command may disrupt existing SSH connections. Proceed with operation. You could probably skip these steps if you don't want the firewall activated at this point. I'm going to actually say yes and see if it disconnects me. So it says the firewall is active. Now, if the firewall turned on and I can't connect, I wouldn't even be able to type. So I think this is a good sign that I can actually still type on the VM. I'm going to run sudo ufw status, and it tells me the rules that have been activated. So that's allowing Apache Full and OpenSSH in from anywhere. So cool, that's why I'm connected. Let's actually go to my server's IP address, and I already forgot about it. Here it is, this 192 address. I'm going to paste that in. And hey, I can still get to my default Apache web page. So this is good progress. So we're going to scroll down past that. There's a section about finding your server's public IP address, and I don't know if I've been clear enough. I don't expect you to be able to send me a URL to your VM working. I understand that you're probably on a laptop or you're on a network connection that your internet service provider wouldn't allow you to host a website. So this section is less relevant to us. The reason DigitalOcean includes it in their guide is they're a web host. So if you were following this guide on one of the VMs, or I think they call them droplets in the DigitalOcean world. If you were connected to one of theirs that you were paying for, you would have to run this command to know what the public IP address of that external server in the cloud is. So they talk about how to look up your IP address, your external IP address, and I'm just going to skip over that because we don't need to know our public IP address. Step 2. So we've got Linux, that's Ubuntu, that's the L. We've got Apache, that's the web server. We're on to M, which is MySQL, which is a database. It's one of the most popular databases out there. I'd like to say it's free and open source, but things around in that world have been changing. When big companies buy open source projects, people get scared. MySQL was in many ways acquired by Oracle, and I'm not going to pretend to understand all logistics of what that means. We do still use MySQL, or a fork of it at least, at Mid-Michigan College, and WordPress is built to use MySQL out of the box, so we're going to follow this tutorial. It's free. I'm not having to pay to use it, but if you were a company and you were trying to get support for that software, you would probably have to enter an agreement with Oracle. So we're going to just copy this command. We're going to use sudo apt install MySQL server. Let me try to arrange my screen here so I can see the notes and type. All right, sudo apt install MySQL server. Now again, it's going to tell you that there are other requirements in order for MySQL to be installed. And you'll actually see that it separates MySQL into a server and a client. It's going to suggest installing all of them, and I encourage you to say yes. Hopefully my internet connection is speedy enough tonight. Is my audio still good, everybody, while we're waiting for this? Okay, good. It's going fast tonight, 96% done for me. All right, so MySQL is technically installed. Now, the very first thing that all of these online articles are going to recommend is that you run a program that comes with MySQL to secure it, because by default, it kind of leaves everything open and installed without a password. And obviously, we want to protect our database because our database might have sensitive information. Even with WordPress, it's going to have sensitive information in the database, like the passwords of the users who log into your WordPress site. So let's run that. We're going to have to run it with sudo. So it's sudo MySQL _ secure installation. Now, this one we have to pay a little bit closer attention to because it's going to ask us questions, and I'd like to talk about what those questions mean. So let's run it. Okay, so it connected itself to MySQL using a blank password. We need to fix that, obviously. The validate password plugin can be used to test passwords and improve security. It checks the strength of passwords and allows the users to set only those passwords which are secure enough. Would you like to set up the validate password plugin? If this was a server that you were going to use that was publicly available, which is not right now because we're using a virtual machine on our computer, I would say yes, and I would enforce a good password. Today, in this demo, I don't think it matters as much, so I'm going to just enter an N for no. But it is going to ask us to set a password. Now, this is where I need to have you, get out a piece of paper, take notes in a document. This password is for MySQL. It's for the database. It is not the password that you are logging in with when you connect to your VM. You could choose to set it to be the same password, or you could choose to make it something different. I know for a fact that I might be typing this so that you can see it. So I'm not going to use one of the passwords that I normally would. So I'm just going to make up a brand new password. And you know what? I'm going to have to type it over here into notes to myself so I don't forget it later on in this live stream. It happens to me all the time. There's my notes. Not picking a super secure one, but I am going to type it twice. And I think I got it the same way the second time. So the next step of this software asks us if we want to remove the anonymous users that come with MySQL by default. And we're going to say yes, because we don't want anyone to be able to just connect and see any information. And then finally it asks, do you want to disallow the root login remotely? And I was torn about this when I practiced it this weekend. In fact, I think the DigitalOcean article has a paragraph about it that helped me decide what to do. I'm going to scroll down here. In Ubuntu systems that are running MySQL 5.7, which we are now, the root MySQL user is set to authenticate using the auth socket plugin by default rather than a password. So what this means is there's a command that I can run, sudo MySQL, that will connect automatically, and I won't have to type in a username and password. It will use sudo, which runs as root, to connect to MySQL, and because it knows that I'm on the local machine, it won't even ask for the password. If you wanted the root user to be able to log in through some other software or remotely, then you would probably have to change the setting. But I don't think we have to change anything. I think we're just going to go with the defaults. You will need to know this root password potentially. So I hope you wrote it down. I know I wrote mine down. So I'm going to say no. We're not going to. Oh, wait. Now I'm confused. What does this mean? Disallow root login remote. Yes, we're going to say yes. Why? We want to stop root unless we're on the computer itself. And then the final question is remove the test database and access to it. I forget what's in the test database. I don't think it's anything too valuable. If you want, go ahead and say no. We'll leave it. That might be an interesting database for us to look at next week when we talk more about databases. And then finally, when we changed our password, there's one reload or restart that's required by MySQL for that to take effect. So we're going to say yes to let that happen. And it's all done. So we've installed MySQL. But, oh, you know what? They don't have any sections about how to actually use MySQL. Okay, so this is off script. I just wanted to show you a couple MySQL things real quick. In order to connect to MySQL, it's sudo MySQL. And it didn't ask me for the password because we only allow the connection remote locally. I'm going to run a command called show databases. And by default, it has this information schema, MySQL, performance schema, and sys database. Which one of those do you think is the default database? I left it, didn't I? I'm scrolling back up. Remove test database. Yeah, I didn't remove it. Maybe it doesn't ship with the test database anymore. All of these look like system databases. The way it generally works, if I want to go in one, I type the name of the database after a use command. So if I want to use MySQL, I can then show tables. And what I want to get to is just select, I want to describe the user table in here. So it has a lot of fields. I'm going to select just host and user out of it. Host user from the user table. So a database is a lot like an Excel document when you think about it. Tables are like the sheets, those tabs that you can have in an Excel document. And then each one of those sheets that you look at is considered a table that has rows and columns. It's a lot less flexible than a spreadsheet, but it can hold a lot more information and you can ask questions of it a lot more quickly than you could in a spreadsheet. So when we get into next week, we will be learning how to write queries like I just did right here to ask for information from a database. And we'll be looking a bit more closely at the differences between rows and columns and fields inside of a MySQL database. But I wanted to show you how you could connect and ask a question. So what I asked for is the usernames and where they can connect from the MySQL database itself. So these are the only users that exist right now. We will be creating one, I think, in the WordPress tutorial. We're going to create a WordPress user. So if I want to get out of here, I think I type quit, semicolon, and I'm back out to the command line. If you're not sure, you can always type, who am I or host name, and it will tell you what you're connected to. So this is my VM name, Kishbuntu. Very creative, I know. Okay, so actually, we took care of the L, the A, and the M with MySQL, so we're on to the P, PHP. PHP, like I said, is a programming language that's really popular for making web applications and building web pages. It has a few other requirements. We're installing PHP, which is the programming language and the way of like running it from the command line. But what we want to do is integrate PHP with the web server that we're running, which is Apache. So we're going to install this lib Apache 2, which is something that is specifically written for Apache that turns on PHP inside of it. And we're also going to install PHP MySQL, which installs something inside of PHP that allows it to connect to MySQL itself. So if you look at here, we've kind of got the A and P all in one line here. We're installing PHP, and we're enabling Apache to run PHP documents, and we're installing the PHP library for connecting to the MySQL database. So I'm just going to copy and paste this over here. And it's going to install actually a few other things that allow PHP to run. So we're going to say yes. So we'll test PHP after it's installed, but what they want us to do is actually edit the configuration so that instead of showing index.html, oops, and it looks like I need to move this. Instead of showing index.html by default, which is what we were getting when we went to that IP address, we want to look for an index.php first and prioritize that. So this is where we're going to fire up our text editor. I think we've been using Nano so far, which is exactly what this article covers. And we're going to edit a file, a configuration file. And most configuration files for the system software on Linux live under this etc directory. I call it etc. I know other people might call it etc. I've been calling it etc for so long that I am not going to be able to stop myself. I'll call it etc. And then there's an Apache 2 folder. And inside of there are lots of little configuration files. This is going to be underneath the mods enabled folder. There's this dir for directory configuration. So I'm just going to paste this command in, and it's going to open it up in Nano. And what it's asking us to do is take this index.php and move it in front of index.html. So I'm going to move around with my cursor here, type index.php in front of index.html. And this is all about priorities. When someone goes to your website, whether that's midmish.edu or yourdomainname.com, do you want the index.html to be the front page, or do you want the PHP software, the index.php, to be the front page? Since we're choosing to run WordPress, we need it to be index.php. Someone asked, what happens if you don't delete the second instance? I wondered that myself over the weekend, and I don't know. I like to imagine that it would work, but there's a possibility that it would not be valid configuration, and there's a way for you to run a command to check your Apache config. I think we're going to do it in the WordPress tutorial next. So if you want to play around with that, you can. So I'm going to save it like this by hitting Control. Actually, I should say something down here. If you can't remember, these little caret symbols stand for the Control key. So if I want to exit out of this editor, I do Control X, and it says, "Oh, you have unsaved changes. Do you want to keep them?" I'm going to say yes, and then it asks, "Where do you want to write this to?" And it's by default, it knows that you opened up the dir.conf file, so it's going to try to overwrite that if you hit Enter. If you don't have access, it'll give you an error message, and it's probably because you forgot the sudo command. Remember, sudo make me a sandwich. That was a comic I hope I shared from XKCD. You know what? It's worth sharing again. Sudo make me a sandwich. It even auto-completes when you search for it. If you ever find yourself doing something that doesn't work in Linux, the solution is almost always to add sudo in front of it. So the joke here is you can tell people, and then if they don't do it, just try sudo, and it probably will make them. Oh, good. Someone said I did share it. Well, I shared it again because it makes me happy. Okay, so we edited the config, but we actually have to restart Apache for that to take effect. So this is another command that I think we may have run once before, the sudo systemctl. This is system control, I think is what it stands for. And we're telling it to restart the Apache service. So just like almost any other software, after you make a change, you probably have to restart it. No error messages, so that's good. They also share another version of that systemctl command that is called status. So we're asking for the status of Apache 2. And it's a little bit more output. It says, you know what? Let's clear that. Try that again. Okay, so it tries to give you this green text or this green dot and green text that says it's running. If it wasn't running, it would be red and it would say stopped or halted or something. Then it has just way information overload. It's telling you that it's actually running, instead of just running Apache, it's running like 6 threads by default so that it can handle incoming people requesting your website. That is more information than we need to know. So I'm just going to hit Q to quit and get back to my command line. But it's good to know that we have a green dot saying Apache's running. The next part of this tutorial talks about how if you're going to write some PHP code yourself, you might be trying to connect to a database or create images with code. And so there's lots of libraries that have been created to go along with PHP that you can search for in the apt package library. And so these are just some examples, like connecting to Postgres, a different database, or I don't know what any of these do, so I'm not going to try installing them, but they were just showing you how you could search for PHP packages. The good news is the next tutorial about WordPress tells you exactly which PHP libraries we need, and you can copy and paste it. So I'm going to keep scrolling down, and we're on to step 4, testing the PHP software. So what we're going to do is create a PHP web page. We're going to go into var www.html. So I'm going to go in there just to show you like a magic trick that there's nothing up my sleeve. If I type ls-la, you'll see that the only file in here is that index.html file. If you wanted to take a look at it, you could actually run nano index.html. Notice that I don't have access to write it because I didn't like to save it because I didn't run it as sudo. But this is that web page that we were looking at before. If you scroll down far enough, you'll see the welcome to Ubuntu. The Apache 2 Ubuntu default page is right there. So I'm going to exit out of there. This is the folder that contains our website, and this is where you uploaded Brandon's Bistro. What we're going to do is create a brand new file called info.php, and that .php extension is significant. That's what Apache will look at and realize that you want to run some PHP code, and it will send that file through PHP for processing. So we're going to create our own sudo nano and then info.php here. It's blank by default, so we need to type in some code. And I have the code up down here. PHP has its own tagging language. So you've been used to the HTML tags. They take over the bracket question mark to mean the bracket question mark PHP to represent the opening of PHP code, and then you close it with a question mark and a closing bracket. So I'm going to type it in myself. You could copy and paste here. So PHP, and then the only line that we're going to write in here is PHP info with an opening and curly brace, opening and closing parenthesis. And then kind of like JavaScript and CSS, every line or every command that you run in PHP has to have a semicolon after it. And then I'm going to close out PHP. I'm going to exit and save this. And now let's go take a look at that web page. 192 blah 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 slash. If I just go to the web page, this is my test welcome front page. I'm going to go to info.php. And that one command is actually like a diagnostic command that will tell you a little bit about the version of PHP you're running. So today that is 7.2.15. And look at all the crazy configuration options that are available with PHP. A few things that I just want to point out is that it does have a MySQL section. So this is how we know that we installed that PHP MySQL library. It has some default values that it uses for connecting to databases. And in the next tutorial, we'll be installing even more PHP libraries. So I think that represents the end. Yeah, the end of this tutorial. So we have, I guess I should not gloss over this. Having that info.php file up there is actually kind of dangerous. If this was on a public website, people could for sure find out what version of PHP you have and see some configuration settings, which might allow them to understand vulnerabilities about how you've installed your web server, or even worst case might have passwords in the configuration screen. So they do recommend that you delete that file when you're done. So I will do that so I don't leave it around. So now it's gone. And if I try to get back to that page, it's a 404 if I refresh it. Not found. I'm glad that they include that because I used to leave those laying around in our folders way too often by accident. So that's the end of that tutorial. I think we're still good on time. We're going to install WordPress, which I'm probably going to speed up my pace here a little bit because we're able to copy and paste sections of the config. Everything still sound good, everybody? Audio-wise? Sweet. Okay. So, on to the WordPress tutorial. So, the prerequisites. We need sudo access to a server. Check. We installed it ourselves. We need to have the LAMP stack already there. We've got Linux, obviously, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, so we're good. And then they include a section about how to secure your website using a free certificate. We actually use these free certificates at mid, but we can't use them on our VM because our VM is not publicly accessible anyways. So we're not going to be installing a secure website, but hopefully you're only entering passwords that you're going to be using for demo purposes. So step 1, we have to create a MySQL database and a user. So if we followed the previous tutorial, they told you that you could just run sudo mysql to connect as root. This tutorial did not know about that previous recommendation, so they give you a different command for connecting. And what I found is if you copy and paste this command in and try to run it to connect to MySQL with the root username and password, it will say access denied for root at localhost because we specifically disabled it. So we have to already modify our approach. Instead of running this command, we're just going to run sudo MySQL. And that should look familiar. We're back inside of MySQL, because it starts, the command line now says MySQL with a little bracket, which means type in MySQL commands. Don't type in other things. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is create the database that WordPress is going to store all of its blog posts, tags, users, all that stuff. And the good thing is we can actually just copy and paste this create database command. It's going to call the database WordPress. That's totally fine for today. When we get to the final project and you're sharing a system with other students, we'll probably have to name our database as something different. But we are going to copy this line, including the semicolon, and paste it in here. And it says query OK, 1 row affected. So it created a database, and I can prove it to you by typing show databases. That used to only show 4 things. Now there's a WordPress database. Now we also need to create a user, a database user that the WordPress software is going to use to connect. We don't want to tell the WordPress software about the root username and password. 1, because we said it wasn't allowed to be used, but 2, because that would actually allow the WordPress user to create other databases, and that could maybe expose some risk, especially if you have other databases on the same system. The question was, does sudo MySQL replace the entire -u root thing? Yeah, it does, because of the tutorial that we followed last time. Yeah, that's a good thing to write down. So now we have to create a user that WordPress is going to be able to use to connect just to its database. They give us the code for that. Now, unfortunately, if you follow this advice, your password will end up being password for this WordPress user. I am going to do that for demo purposes because I'm going to have to type this password into the WordPress config later. But you might want to change that a little bit so it's not something so obvious. So I'm going to copy this line here up to the semicolon. And the thing to note is if you had chosen a different name for your WordPress database, you'd have to change this part, the WordPress part. And if you wanted a different username, you probably would put something different than WordPress user. Maybe you'd put the name of your website, like Brandon's Bistro at localhost, or the password especially you would change. Now, you are not going to be prompted to enter that password twice. It's just going to be once and done. And the warning is probably that my password was terrible. But we have to run this flush privileges command. Otherwise, that user, MySQL won't know about that user yet. So we're going to run flush privileges. And then we are going to exit. So how do you know if that user account worked? Well, we're going to scroll back up to how it recommended connecting. We're going to run this MySQL command. I'm going to paste it in. And instead of MySQL-u root, -u stands for which user you want to use. We're going to use that WordPress user. And -p represents prompt me for the password. So the password should be just password. So let me paste that in. And if it let me log in, which it did, then I know that my user worked. So I'm going to run that show databases command. And what's interesting about this is when I'm not logged in as root, the only thing that I have access to, well, one is this one database that might be the test database. I don't remember what that is. WordPress is the name of the database that we created and we chose to create. That's really the only database I have access to with this user. So I think that's good. We're going to quit out of here and go back to the command line. Step 2, we're going to revisit those PHP extensions. WordPress does a lot of cool things. If you upload images, it'll create thumbnails of the images automatically. And so it needs some special libraries to be able to modify images and work with different types of code that the WordPress developers will write, including things like zip files, XML, and other crazy cool things. So we are going to copy and paste this apt line that has all of the requirements, paste it in, and let those install. And this might take a little bit longer. I think we're still good on time. I was trying to keep this under an hour, but we might go over just a little bit. Oh, that's nice and fast tonight. Okay, so when you install these extensions for PHP, the web server that's already running doesn't know about those. It doesn't have that version of PHP isn't going to know about all these plugins. So we're going to run this system control restart command to restart Apache. Good. Okay. And now if we had that info page still around, we'd probably see a lot more things listed somewhere in that long, lengthy list of all the PHP modules that are installed. Okay, step 3. We're now into the finer details of getting a web server ready for Apache. The coolest thing about WordPress way back when was that it could actually create really cool URLs for your web pages. Instead of a web page that was something like a number or like something.php question mark, then ID equals a number, you could actually say that I want a URL like midmish.edu/blogs or /2019/03 for March, and then the title of my blog post. And the secret sauce behind that is WordPress would actually override some Apache configuration to allow it to change those URLs for you. So we have to do a little bit more to Apache to allow WordPress to do that. And this is where I deviate the most because we're going to be using the information in this yellow section. There is a default configuration file for our Apache website right now. That's the one that we're going to modify. A little bit later on, they tell you to create a new config file here for WordPress, but we don't have a separate website for WordPress. All we're trying to do is host WordPress. So we're going to just, instead of referring to this WordPress.conf file, we're going to refer to this 000-default.conf file. So we need to enable .htaccess overrides. .htaccess is actually another type of file that you can write in a website. It starts with this period, so it's hidden by default from people that are just looking on the file system. But this actually allows you to override the Apache configuration inside of the WordPress folder. And that's the secret sauce of WordPress. So let's go ahead and we're going to copy the sudo nano etsy apache2 sites available / and then instead of this wordpress.conf, I want to do one of these other files. So what I did is I hit tab at the end here, and I think I hit it twice, and then it showed me the files that are in that folder. And we want the one that starts with a 0, and I'm going to hit tab. Let me shrink my screen here. There, that's better. Okay, so now you should be able to see everything. Yeah, so now I'm going to be sudo nano, and then the path to this configuration file that we're going to edit. There's a lot more in this configuration file than the one that we looked at before. And we're going to adjust a few things. Let me scroll down here. The first thing that we're going to do is not actually in this file. If you look for this document root line right here, it points everything into this var www.html folder. This is where that default file is, that welcome to Ubuntu page. I'd like us to change that. Let's scroll down, move our cursor over. Let's change that to that same folder /WordPress. And just leave it without the slash at the end. What we're going to do is we're going to create a folder when we download the WordPress code. And we want the main IP address, when you go to that IP address in your web browser, to take you to the WordPress page. So that's the first change that I'd like you to make. The second change is in between these virtual host tags. They look like HTML tags, but it's yet another syntax for editing Apache configuration. We're going to paste this information in. We want to have this open directory tag, and it's going to have the path to our WordPress folder. Oh, and it's not even... You know what? Okay, let me be very careful because we're going to mess this up. Instead of the HTML folder, we want it to be var www/WordPress. Let's be very careful with that. So we're going to be we're going to leave that HTML folder alone. It's going to have the default HTML file. Let's do var www.WordPress. Thank you for catching that in the chat room. I'm sorry I didn't see that right away. So that's going to be the base directory, because I'm pretty sure that's where the tutorial has us copy all the WordPress code into, and I don't want to mess that up. So we're going to follow the tutorial. And we're going to copy and paste these opening tags. And it just has to be somewhere before the closing virtual host. So I'm just going to go to the end of this here before the virtual host tag closes. Move that down. I'm just going to paste it in. I mean, if you really, again, computers don't care about white space, but if you wanted to, you could tab these things in to look all pretty. And then I'm going to exit with Control X and save with yes and hit enter. And that's updated configuration that we're going to have to restart for it to take effect. But I think they have a few more things that they want us to do. Okay, so part of those fancy URL rewrites, or rewriting is the technique, but we want to have certain URLs go and mean a different thing when it gets into Apache and PHP. We're going to use a module called rewrite inside of Apache 2. So they give you this command. We already installed it because it came with Apache. We're going to enable this module. So it's sudo a2nmod for Apache 2 enable module rewrite. It says we're enabling the module rewrite to activate the new configuration. You need to run systemctl restart Apache 2. But this is the cool thing. They have this command for Apache 2 CTL that will run a configuration test. And because we typed in some content, I'd actually recommend that we run this. And this, I'd be curious if we ran this when we had that index.php in multiple places, if it would have complained. I'm going to run it, and it says, warning, document root var www WordPress does not exist. True that. It's not there yet. Hopefully that won't stop us from doing this. And then it says it can't determine the server's fully qualified domain name. That's because we only have an IP address. We don't have a domain name, so we can ignore that for now. But it says overall that the syntax is okay, which is good enough at this point in the tutorial. So we're going to run the restart command, sudo systemctl restart Apache 2. And I'm pretty sure now that we broke our website because that directory did not exist, right? Yeah, so now even slash is not found. Well, hold on tight. We're totally fine. We're going to download WordPress next. And we're going to follow, like, to the T these steps. So what they're going to have us do is download the absolute latest version of WordPress. And so WordPress promises that when they release new code, that their website /latest.tar.gz, which is a type of a zip file in a way, is going to be the latest source code. They release probably at least one version a day, I'd say. Maybe it's more like every week, but it feels like it's every day. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into a temporary folder and we're going to download the WordPress code. We're going to take that GNU zip file and expand it to be the whole folders, and then we're going to actually prepare and edit some of the files in that folder before we put it into the web directory. So let's go through these step by step. We're going to cd into /temp. Let's see if I can shrink this. Oh, I'm going to try to type. Why not? curl-big O for open. And we're going to download from wordpress.org/latest.tar.gz. And if I ls, look at that. I've got a little tar file. So we're going to run this tar command, xzvf latest.tar. Look at all the files it created. So if I do another ls here, not only is that tar file there, but so is this WordPress folder. I'm going to go inside of WordPress. And if I do an ls, look at all the files that are in here. There's an index.php. That's the most important one, obviously. But then there's a bunch of other code that file requires to be around. So we're going to scroll down here. It wants us to create that .htaccess file. I'm going to go back to copying and pasting here. We'll paste that in. You know, I can probably resize my screens to make this a little bit easier to follow everybody. There we go. Okay. And then we'll also copy over. Notice how there's this wp config sample file. They purposely want us to create our own configuration. But what they do is they provide the sample file that we can copy from and then tweak some of the settings. So we're going to use the cp command. That's the copy command. I think we used that early on in our exploration of Linux. We're going to paste that in. It's going to copy it. and rename it from wp-config sample to just wp-config. If you run ls, you'll see that it exists right there. And then it's going to have us create a few other folders ahead of time. We're going to create an upgrade folder. When WordPress tries to auto-update, it needs to be able to save the new code into a folder. So let's run this command to create that ahead of time. And now that we have placed everything in this temp folder, we want to move it to this final home, its final location. So we're going to run a copy command that's going to copy everything with a -a from this temp WordPress folder. This dot means grab everything and everything else underneath the WordPress folder and copy it over to /var/www/WordPress. And that is important. I'm glad we caught that earlier on. We would have had problems. There's a question in the chat. Is curl like a links browser? It is. Curl by default just is like a single session. Like you run curl and you give it a URL and it goes in it. It just grabs that page. It's not really for browsing around. There's a way. There's a lot of extra curl commands that we use. Like a really weird example of how we use it at the college is we know that there's a way to copy information from our system into another system that we use. And so it's through a URL. So we actually can run a curl command that's just like submitting a form. We actually do the post of the form, send the data that we need, and we know that it created something in this other system outside of the college. So it's definitely really handy. Probably one of the most handy command line tools out there is curl. But let's run this copy command. Oh, that was fast. So if all went well, we should be able to go into this var www WordPress folder with the cd command. And I'll do an ls, and all of our files are there. Beautiful. We're not done yet, though. In order for WordPress to be able to handle file uploads and to keep certain parts of those folders secret and protected, we need to set some ownership. Apache, if you remember way back when we tried to edit your website, you had to actually change file ownership so that the Apache, or so that you could actually edit it. We're going to do something very similar, but the user that we're going to give access to this folder is the Apache www data user that's running the web server. So we're going to take a lot of these commands by faith here. Sudo chown changes ownership recursively with the -r, and it sets the user and the group both to www data for this entire directory. So it's going to allow the web server, the user that's running the web server, to accept uploaded files like images and other things, even plugins. And then the actual permissions, what that user is allowed to do, even though it owns the files, has to be adjusted, whether it's a file or a directory. So this is a really sophisticated command that I probably would not be able to write myself. It finds in this folder the directories, that's this type D, and on each directory it executes the chmod command. And it changes the permissions so that 7 means all access, so read, everyone has access to read it. Write is the second number. 5 means user and group, so the www data user and group can write to it. And the last character, or the last digit, 0, represents everyone. So other users on the system will not have access to edit the files, let alone read them. The directories, that is. Then the second command is not on directories, but on the files themselves. And it allows reading and writing, but not execute. And then the group is allowed to read. Is that what 4 is? I think 4 is read. And then 0 is nothing again. So we're going to run this command by copying and pasting it. And that should be good enough for now. Okay, last step. I hope this is the last step before we actually see a web page. Yes, that can definitely get ugly in a hurry. Thank you for the chat comment. We're going to set up the WordPress config file. What we have to do is actually go into that config file that we copied from the sample and type in some information. How to connect to our database. We have to put in some secret stuff that represents how to make a unique password on this computer. So the first thing that we're going to do is run another curl command. What this is going to do is visit a web page that gives you random values. So when you run this command, you're going to get values different than me. But it actually outputs this code that we're going to be pasting into the PHP file. So if you're on PuTTY, you're going to have to select everything and that should copy it into your clipboard. On a Mac, you're going to select like this and hit Command-C to copy it. These are random values, if you can't tell already, that are used to actually filter into the cryptography that are used to protect passwords that people create inside of WordPress. Now, these are very secret values. It would be bad if this was a real WordPress site and I had this up on my screen, because people could then decrypt passwords potentially. So we're not going to be sharing this with other people, but I'm going to be copying and pasting it into my file. So they even say, like, do not copy these that are from the website. You need to use your own values. But what we need to do is go into that config file. So we're going to run this nano command, and we're going to try to scroll down to where those things go. We're going to come up to the top here where this database name and database user come in. But we're going to try to get down to, here they are, these lines right here. So I'm just going to delete the ones that exist already. And thankfully I have a clipboard history here. I'm going to paste in the ones that I had copied from that curl command. Okay, all right, that's that for that section. I'm going to scroll back up because the next thing that we have to do is actually define how to connect to the database. So you remember that we weren't very creative with our database name. We called it WordPress. And for the user, I think we had left it at WordPress user. You might have different values. But this is where you need to have that password. And remember, I left mine as password, which is really bad of me. Hopefully yours is a little bit different. It asks, where is this database located? We're going to say it's localhost. That's the keyword for this computer, this VM. And then the only other thing that they ask us to do, I think, is add one more line. And I'm just going to put it after this other define statement. It's going to say define fs_method, and you could copy and paste this. We're going to set that to direct. And let's see what that does. Since we've given the web server permission to write where it needs to, we can explicitly set the file system method to direct. Failure to set this with our current settings would result in WordPress prompting for FTP credentials when we perform certain actions. Okay, so like when we had an upgrade or an upgrade to WordPress, or we're going to install a theme, it would ask you for your username and password in the WordPress website, which is a little bit scary to me if you don't have like a certificate installed to encrypt that. So we are enabling this file system to direct, which means that, hey, this Apache user that's running the web server can actually just edit files. So upload what you need. So that's a WordPress setting that we're putting in here. And if you didn't want to type that, like I said, you could just copy and paste this line right in there. So we're going to exit out of that and save. Now we're done with our text editor. We're going to go to our website, and we're going to cross our fingers that I didn't make a mistake when I was doing this in front of all of you. So I'm going to go to my IP address, and what pops up is a WordPress page. Look at that. Doesn't get better than that in a live stream. So this looks like a little web installer. We're going to install WordPress in English in this live stream. Trust me, it gets even harder to understand when it's in a different language that you're not fluent in. We're going to make a site title. So I'm going to make Brandon's Bistro. And now you actually have to create a username and password for yourself to use when you log into WordPress. This is where I need to point out that in the top upper left here, it says this is not a secure website. So please don't use a username and password that you use for real things for this project. Come up with something different. I'm going to use my normal bkish username. And for my password, I am not going to let you see it, but it also isn't anything super secure. In fact, I'm going to make it be the same password that I had set earlier. It is indeed a very weak password. And because it's so weak, I have to check a box to say I know it's weak. I feel like I might have typed that wrong anyways. All right. I'm going to enter an email address. And the only thing I'd recommend is there's an option to discourage search engines from indexing the site. Because this isn't even public, I don't think it matters. But that's the bare minimum that you need to create a user that you'll be able to log in with. So remember that username and password and click the install button. Hey, that was fast. Let's click the login button and try to get in. Boom. We're in WordPress. And I'm curious what this version is. If we go to updates, we are running version 5.1.1. Look at that. And future security updates will be applied automatically. We're running WordPress and we're logged in. So we can do all sorts of cool things. If you've done the comparison challenge, then you know how to create posts probably. So let's just add a new one. I'm going to skip these tips. Go away, tips. Got it. And we'll say, I survived WordPress on LAMP. And I'll put some lorem, some 2 paragraphs in there. Whoa, that's not lorem ipsum. Apparently I can't paste lorem ipsum in here. All right, let's publish. There's lots of settings involved there that you can learn more about in those lynda.com courses. But let's click View Post to see that on our website. There it is. I survived WordPress on LAMP. And this is actually a WordPress site. So if I click on the name of the site, you'll see that all my blog posts appear here. And there were two. There's one that was created automatically, and then the one that I wrote. There's a search interface provided. So if I search for WordPress, my post comes up. You get all this awesome stuff on your website for free, all from WordPress. If you're not logged in, then you can log in to edit your site. But when you are logged in, there's this bar across the top where you can very quickly get to Brandon's Bistro and then add new pages and posts. I hope you'll have time to play around with some of the themes that are available. This is the 2019 theme, but I know that I have a lot of students that really preferred the old look. So this is 2016. If I go back to Brandon's Bistro, this design probably looks more like all the other sites that you've seen that are running WordPress. There's a way to create pages and nav bars and put them together in the design. So that would be underneath pages, how you can create pages. And then let's see, underneath the menus, you can take pages and put them in a menu and then add that menu to a region on the theme. I recommend going through the Lynda courses to get more familiar with WordPress when we get closer to the final project. But let's just reflect on what we've done in this live stream. We're at about an hour and 12 minutes, and we installed all the software needed on Linux to host and run the LAMP stack, which allowed us to install WordPress. We configured that all from the command line up until the point where we ran through the wizard for installing WordPress, and we're in. So I hope you enjoy getting this set up on your VM. If you have questions, feel free to ask me on Slack. I'll ask the people who are present, are there any other questions about installing WordPress at this point, or do you want to just play around with it on your own? There are tons of plugins, by the way. I should mention that. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat. Yeah, I know probably many of you have used it at some point in time with WordPress. It's awesome. Okay, all right, no questions right now. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sorry I went over an hour, but we covered a lot of ground here. So good luck installing it on your VM at home. And I will see you next time.